What is it that liberates oppressed people? I was taught it's often American power. During World War II, our military defeated the Nazis, liberated Europe, rescued people from concentration camps. 45 years later, I'm told just the threat of our military buildup, defeated the Soviet Union. And now our troops in the Middle East will help create islands of freedom. No, says historian Thaddeus Russell, I have it wrong. So how do I have it wrong?
Well, as a matter of fact, in general, American military intervention has increased anti-Americanism and hardened repressive regimes. On the other hand, American popular culture, what is often called the worst of our culture, in many cases has actually done more for liberation and for our national security than anything the 82nd Airborne could do.
All right, well, let's talk about the Soviet Union.
Sure.
My understanding, it was Reagan's military buildup. They spent so much competing, they couldn't do it, they collapsed.
Well, as a matter of fact, it collapsed from within. It didn't collapse from without. There was never an invasion. There was no military conquest of the Soviet Union. What happened in the Soviet Union and in the Eastern Bloc generally was that people simply walked away from the ideology of communism. And that began especially when American popular culture, jazz and rock and roll, it began infiltrating those countries after World War II.
Evidence.
Evidence? American soldiers brought jazz during World War II to the Eastern Front. Soviet soldiers brought it back. Eastern European soldiers brought it and spread it across those countries. And then on the streets all over the Soviet Union, in the big cities and in Eastern Europe, you saw these kids on the streets who were known as the Stilyagi in the Soviet Union. They had other names in East Germany. They were kids who wore jeans, they wore ducktail hairdos, they listened to jazz, later rock and roll, they loved to dance and smoke cigarettes.
Stalin's called it the bourgeois inception from the West.
That is the best evidence that American popular culture subverts repressive regimes, was that Stalin and his commissars were hysterical about this.
They kept arresting them.
They would round them up on the streets and send them to prisons. They made jazz illegal. They made playing jazz instruments illegal. They made playing the drums in particularly sensual ways illegal.
Because it was too sensual, or what was threatening?
Because any repressive regime depends on social order. I would say that any regime at all depends on social order to maintain its power. And social order and sensuality, the pleasures of the body, are often at odds, or are fundamentally at odds, I would say. And Stalin and his commissars understood that.
They said black music, dancing, they include excessive movements of the hips, arms, and legs.
Which was exactly what people were saying about jazz. In the United States, 20 and 30 years earlier, jazz, people don't know this, was in its first inceptions in the 1920s and 30s, was attacked roundly as primitive jungle music that was bringing down American youth. Stalin and his commissars across Eastern Europe said exactly the same things with the same words later on.
And then rock and roll came.
And that was even more threatening. It became even more popular than jazz. There were hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of rock fans across Eastern Europe. By the 1980s, disco and rock in the 1980s were enormously popular throughout the communist world.
That they felt they had to relax the rules because they were losing.
By the 80s, it was simply too late. Once Gorbachev comes into power, institutes glasnost, he sees that if he continues to try to repress this energy, this desire for freedom and pleasure, he would lose. So he let it go. Western acts came in, and it took off from there.
And they let these acts in. It was surprising. Bruce Springsteen went to East Germany and drew a huge crowd. We have a clip of him singing Born in the USA. And in East Germany, this is pretty remarkable because so many people were there and they're singing along to Born in the USA. They weren't allowed in the USA.
That's right. That's right. This is great evidence of its enormous popularity. This signaled the end of the communist regime.
All right, I can see how the music had a big effect, but I would think a much bigger effect would just be raw consumerism, having choice. They wanted the stuff that we have, the phones, bikes, cars.
I actually was in the Soviet Union in 1986, and when I walked into Red Square in Moscow, I was immediately swarmed by kids, by youth and young adults who wanted to buy my jeans. And this happened to any American who showed up in the Soviet Union. They were desperate for anything.
I sold my
Nikes
in Red Square.
There you go. And I got a Soviet soldier's uniform in exchange for it.
But that, you say, is what brought the wall down, not our guns?
If you look at the revolutions that began in 1989 and culminated in 1991, you see people over decades walking away from the ideology, and you see it in internal documents that we found in the communist regimes. They were saying this to themselves. If we If we continue to allow Western influence popular culture in, our people will want to leave.
And it just reminds me of this Wendy's commercial that ran in the 1980s. Let's take a look at.
Pay attention, please, thank you. Is next day there? Very nice. Is next evening there? Very nice.
Having no choice is no fun. That's why at Wendy's, every hamburger isn't dressed the same. You'll get your choice of fresh toppings.
People want choices.
They want choices, they want freedom, they want the freedom to indulge in pleasure and in their desires.